Hello, everyone. I'm very happy to be hosting this great webinar exclusive together with Robin Dunbar and Martin Russell. So we're just waiting for maybe we're going to have people coming in and jump in our discussion. So we're very, very happy at UBQT to have Robin and Martin. It's been now a year. I have the chance to know them. They have been great supporters of UBQT. I wish we could see, your faces and your smiles, but instead you will have the chance to see their face and their smiles and their good energy. Great people, beautiful personalities, and I'm very, very happy to host this webinar today with them. So I'm going to quickly first introduce in a very short line Robin and Martin. And what we're going to do is that we're going to make it more as a conversation, not really like a question and answer type of format on my side. I don't need to speak much. It's more going to be about covering all the topics that are about being human in a digital world. And we're going to be able to take your questions as well, which is it's going to be in the Q&A. I'm going to have access to it. You can write your questions and we will also share it so we can make it super interactive. And yeah, so Robin, very famous for his number, is a professor of evolutionary of psychology at University of Oxford. He has written as well a number of books, which one of them is my new Bible. It's Friends. And Martin is, as I always say, the go-to person for anything about diaspora engagement. And he's also has been studying, has a PhD, has studied diaspora for the, I think, Irish population, if I'm not mistaken, Martin. And they're both actually in the UK today. We were talking about, Robin, how fun this would have been to make it offline. Unfortunately, it hasn't been able. We haven't been able to do this yet. Maybe one day. And but also what it gives as well is the opportunity for everyone to have this live moment, although it's not offline, it's actually live. So we can have, any tech glitches, any, and to be very honest, we haven't prepared at all for this webinar because we really wanted to make it a conversation with Robin and Martin. So Robin, Martin, you can unmute yourself. And shall we start maybe with the Dunbar's number? And maybe Robin, you can start with a little bit your story about how you discovered that number. And I would say that what we wanted to cover as well is connectivity and belonging. And from belonging, we will then go to Martin, and he will be able also to talk to us about diaspora. And we'll continue the conversation like this, cover as well what is online and offline, what it is to be human in a digital world. So we will start with what it is to be human, and we will continue with what it is to be human in a digital world today. So please, Robin, kick off.
Okay, so Dunbar's number is the limit on the number of relationships, meaningful relationships, that you can have at any one time. I guess we'll come back to how that relates to the digital world later on, as it were. But so I'll just focus on what that means in terms of both our kind of history as a species, if you like. So what happened before the digital era, in life in the real world, as I always refer to it. Okay, so this number, Dunbar's number, was predicted off the back of an equation relating social group size and brain size in primates. And if you plug human brain size into that relationship, you get a number of about 150, give or take some variation around that. And it turns out that that number is indeed very much the typical size of our extended friendship circle. So these are all the people we have Relationships with that have history. We've known them for some time. We know a lot about them. We feel comfortable about interacting with them. We do, as I sometimes describe it, it's all the people you might meet in the departure lounge of Hong Kong Airport at 3 o'clock in the morning, and you wouldn't feel embarrassed about going up to them and slapping them on the back and saying, "Hey, how are you doing? I haven't seen you for a long time." Because they know where you stand in their social world and you know where they stand in your social world. So that number 150 keeps coming up all over the place. So we've found it both in, if you ask people to list out all their friends and extended family that they feel they have meaningful relationships with, that they try and keep in regular contact with, let's say at least once a year. We found it in Facebook data sets. So I think the biggest sample of the lot was 61 million Facebook data sets. These are not an analysis we did, although we have looked at Facebook data, but somebody else looked at Facebook, a huge sample of Facebook data. The average number of friends on Facebook, despite the urban myths, was 149 exactly. And Dunbar's number is 150. So it doesn't predictions don't come any better than that in our world. We've seen it in the structure of military organizations. We've seen it in the structure of business organizations. We've seen it in the number of people that you telephone regularly on your phone book, as it were. And again, those are huge samples. I think there were something like 20% of an entire European, very large European country was the telephone data set comes from one provider. And again, if you look at the number of different people that have phoned, and that's to say, forget the business numbers. These are meaningful relationships because our criterion is, do they phone you back? It must be at least one phone call each way to count a relationship. Then again, we get something very close to 150. If you look historically, it's the average size of villages, both in deep history. So there's a very nice data set in England, kindly carried out by the Norman conquerors that we had around 1066, who censused everything to see how much tax they could get out of us. And they literally recorded everything, and from that, every cow, sheep, field, chimney, whatever. And from that, the historians have figured out that the average size of villages in 1000 AD was in England and Wales was 150 people. There's a very nice data set that spans 6 centuries from the Italian Alps, going from about 1250 to about 1850, on the size of grazing associations in the Italian Alps in one location. And grazing association is really basically a village. Again, the average size was about 145, despite the fact the population was increasing. When it got too big, the village split, and half of them went off somewhere else. So you can see lots of examples of this number reappearing, both in terms of how we're organized, but also in terms of our personalized relationship. So it's a very robust effect. It's a very robust number.
I actually wanted to make a poll. Let me see if we can launch it. Because I was wondering how many people from the audience knows about the Dunbar's number. And we can see now the poll, everybody's reacting. You know that in your book I read, so your book has been published in 2021, right?
Yeah.
And it says that there has been, at that time at least, 36.4 million hits on Google for Dunbar's number, which I was
Really?
very impressed.
One of these days, I must read what it says and make sure it's accurate.
It is. So yeah, it's great because we're saying that actually we have 54% people that didn't know what the Dunbar's number is. We did very well to ask the question, so we know how how prepared
Right.
we need to be to answering this point. So this number, and given our life today, and I'm thinking as well about, let's say, connectivity, belonging, and maybe as well, for the global citizen, like all of us, I would say, that are actually, and many of them of our audience as well, global citizens, because we have lived in different cities, in different countries. And so what happens to that number when you actually, have living in different places? And I know you actually spent some time in Kenya, if I'm not mistaken, Robin.
Tanzania, next door.
Tanzania. I thought Kenya, sorry. And so what can you say about, because I remember I told you, like, do you like to meet again your friends that you met there?
Yes. Yeah. So the issue here really is how Dunbar's number is created, if you like, and maintained. And the answer is it depends critically on frequency of contact. So you have to keep seeing these people, meeting with them, or the friendship will just gradually fade away. It takes a couple of years only for a relationship, a good friendship, to go from being a good friendship, perhaps not your best friend, but a good friend that you spend a lot of time with, to becoming just, well, somebody I once knew, an acquaintance, but I haven't seen them for years and I don't now know much about them. It only takes about 2 years of not seeing them for that to happen. The that has two consequences, of course. One is there's a natural turnover all the time. You meet new people and so you stop seeing other people and they drift out of your social world. I think the big problem that comes in the modern world that we all live in, which is this very mobile world, is that yes, you spend a lot of time building friendships, and then because you can't meet them very easily, especially face to face when you move to another city or another country, those relationships fade. And one of the consequences of that seems to be that whereas, say, until about 100 years ago, all your friends would be in the same village and your relatives as well, they all live in the same village and everybody'd know everybody else. What you end up now is a very fragmented social network of 150 people. So some of those obviously will be extended family. They kind of tend to be a bit more stable. But the friendship part of that is very unstable. And so you end up with these little clusters of friends that you knew in a particular place. And of course, those clusters of friends don't know each other. If you're living in the same village, everybody knows everybody else. But in this more mobile world, you end up with this set of small groups of friends who don't know other groups from other parts, and of course they don't know your extended family either, particularly because they won't have ever had a chance to meet them. So you have a very fragmented network, and I think that in some sense creates a less supportive environment for you, given that the quality and number of friendships that you have or relationships that you have, because it can include family. Family can be friends. The number and quality of those really are the single best predictor for our psychological health and well-being, and even our physical health and well-being. And if you don't have those supporting relationships, you are very much exposed to things like depression and the downward spiral that creates. And you get much more susceptible to physical illnesses that normally you would kind of shrug off and not notice. The winter flus and all these kind of things suddenly, sort of impact on you much more. So how do you keep those friendships alive and working? Because in many ways, your old friendships are actually the best. You had most fun with them. And B, they're the ones that will, I won't say owe you most, but be most willing to come and support you should you need support in any way. Simply because they've known you much longer. But if you haven't kept that friendship going, they're not going to be so willing to come and support you in whatever way it is. It might be, comfort you, get you out of your depressed state, or it might be to, help you move house, or lend you some money when you need a quick injection of cash or something like that. Those kind of little acts, you might say, of charity really depend on how long you've known somebody and how close that relationship then is, in terms of their willingness to rush to your aid, as it were.
Yes. Do you think as well that because we met our old friends at a time that we had more energy to have fun moments?
Well, they certainly go back to the time when we did a lot of dancing and partying together. That's true, yes.
I feel like this with my girlfriends, the ones that I had when I was in my 20s. Every time we have to meet back, we are like actually spending more time dancing as well than the ones that I met recently. But yeah. So if we're talking about all this and we're talking then about, I guess, belonging, what about, because I really wanted to do this very conversational. So Martin, please jump in and give your diaspora flavor to all this.
You're good. You're good. And first of all, look, it's a privilege to be here with Professor Dunbar. His work has influenced much of my own thinking about diaspora community. So I'm ferociously taking notes as we go. But you might get a kick out of this, Professor Dunbar. When I submitted the first piece of my PhD, my professor sat me down and he said, "Martin, you have to take this as a compliment, but you sound better in print." So look, I'm carrying a bit of an Irish accent, so Lara just waved a virtual pen at me to tell me to slow down, because when I get going on this stuff, I get excited and I talk maybe a bit more quickly than I should, to be frank. But look, Professor Dunbar mentioned, we're living in a world of mobility, and particularly on the diaspora side of it. The numbers are bearing that out. In 1990, there was 150 million people living outside the country they were born in. Today, that number is 281, and it's only going one way. And of course, that's first generation migrants. When you talk about diaspora, you have, a deepening generational lens. And that question of belonging becomes incredibly powerful and important. And my own work particularly was looking at the role of the Irish diaspora, particularly in the peace process in the north of Ireland. And we began to see that belonging transform into something just incredibly powerful for Ireland. And look, I want to be honest, diasporas can do pretty bad things as well. It's not all roses in the gardens with this stuff, but we slowly got through it. But, I think, and Professor Dunbar, in one of his kind of recent books, I think he hit the nail on the head. And if you don't mind, I'll quote it, Professor. You said, "Community in a word is the beating heart of life, and we neglect it at our peril." And I think when you begin to look at some of the shifts that are happening around the world, around loneliness and isolation, we have this big question of, the world is so high tech now, but, we can't be forgetting the high touch piece, and it's finding the balance between, you kind of being human in that digital world. And for me, diaspora communities, you see it, back to the origins of the concept, people talking about them as imagined communities, as being in between and having to navigate those hyphenated identities. And I think the beauty of what I've seen in diaspora communities is that when you nurture that sense of belonging, it's very powerful. And as I say, it's authentic, I think is the word that I would use. And people kind of, not to say that you create insular communities through diaspora communities, because you still have to work with host societies and engage. But the line that captured my eye in kind of doing a bit of reading around diaspora in recent years was from a professor at Stanford University in the Graduate School of Business, Professor Cohen. And his line is that he believes that a crisis of belonging is destroying us. And I think that's very powerful when you take back. And I think we live in a world where we're so focused on doing urgent things, but not important things. Like the hard work of, maintaining those relationships, building those friendships. I think that's where true success will come for people, and I don't mean that in a monetary success. I mean that in, as Professor Dunbar said, in psychologically and mental health and physical health. And the Professor Cohen had another beautiful line that I think we should all print out and have in front of us as we do those urgent things. He said, belonging is not a byproduct of success, it's a condition for success. And I think what we've seen with diaspora communities is that when they coalesce around a mission, they can do incredible things. And I'm not saying it's a magic bullet stuff, but as I say, look, I'm in Cornwall this week looking at the Cornish diaspora around the world, and it often is quite not even about nations, about place. And if you can nurture that belonging, you can nurture belonging. you can be strategic at it. You mentioned partying and dancing. We had a network of Irish pubs around the world,
Yes.
which was full of laughter. But trust me, that was cultural diplomacy 101 for us. In the sense of where we're going. So look, I kind of pause there to get the conversation going, but I think that's how we kind of connect the dots dots in this, and I'm a big believer, not just in Dunbar's number, but because I've seen it with diasporas, and you can see the layers and the qualities of the relationships, and some are at the periphery of where you are, but they're in that cluster, and I think for places and organizations that are looking to engage diasporas, but for diasporas themselves, building that sense of community amongst you is what's at the heartbeat. And I'll close out with this positive note. Whenever I sit down with diasporas, the world is full of doom and gloom at the minute. I'm a bit of an eternal optimist. It might be the Irish in me, but whenever I see diasporas sitting down together, it always usually ends up with laughter and touch and smile and sometimes tears, of the homeland and all that kind of stuff. But there's something very emotional, powerful, and human in that. So I think in this world of digital connectivity, that sense of belonging in a diaspora lens is a little bit of a hidden superpower.
Yeah, I just a comment on that actually, because that really is very interesting. But the last point you made, I think, is very pertinent, and you see it constantly. So this is very much the Scots diaspora abroad, which is where I come from, as they say, over many generations. This sense of belonging pulls the community together, and you particularly see it in Scots, but probably other groups as well. There's a maintenance of the sort of cultural tradition that keeps that sense of who you are. But we actually looked at diaspora social networks at one stage, or at least this was actually done by my Spanish collaborators, because we found an oddity in the context of the structure of networks. And networks normally consist of a very small number of very close friends and a large outer periphery of more casual friends, but still important, as it were. And what we found was that migrant communities in particular end up with a kind of inverted social network. They have relatively speaking, much larger number of close friends and very few outer layer friends. And that's partly because they have much smaller networks. And it kind of makes sense. I mean, you go to a strange country. Of course, you don't know anybody, and you don't know where to go to meet people. Even you don't even know, how do you start a conversation? What is the current topic of conversation that people would talk about when they first meet? You just don't know these things, and so you end up being forced back on yourself into your local community, which at least you feel comfortable with, and in some sense, of course, that's very important in terms of survival as a migrant. You see it with the Scots historically. Wherever they went, they formed a Scots club or a Caledonian association or a St Andrews association, and the Irish probably did the same with St Patrick's societies and things, to provide that sort of sense of commonality. I know who you are. I know your cultural. I don't have to explain my joke to you. You get it straight away. All these kind of things that are important to the flow of conversation. So, one sense, that forming of, sort of migrant villages, if you like, or even ghettos, you might say, is very important to your survival in a new place, because it provides you with a support network. But on the other hand, it perhaps impedes your ability to reach out and become embedded. It's sort of like being thrown into the swimming pool when you can't swim. Boy, do you learn to swim quick. So there's a sense in which actually, if you move to another country, you don't want to get too embedded in a migrant community. You want to get out there and embed yourself in the new culture. So you're sort of torn, migrants, I think, are always torn between these two. The short-term benefit, the easy thing to do is to go and talk to other Irish folk, because at least they like the same beer. But on the other hand, of course, you then end up being kind of becoming isolated from the wider community, and not being able to benefit fully from access to the wider community if you do that. So it is a kind of problem, I think, but it's not a new problem. It's ever been thus for thousands and thousands of years. So, but it is interesting that how important your home culture becomes when you're a migrant.
Yeah.
And that probably is actually, in terms of giving you support to bed in, a place of comfort to retreat to, as
Yeah.
it were. It probably is. But I just kind of wondered how your experience of these kind of diaspora communities, because something that you've worked on in many different places, sort of relates to this question. What is the best thing to do?
No, look, it's an important question. I think it takes time at a very simple level, and I think you're pointing to, historically, when you look across the trajectory of history, quite often what end up being the most powerful diasporas, linking into the survival point, are actually victim diasporas. That have had to go for a particular reason, and they go kind of with an entrenched mindset. But completely hear what you say. I think the generational layering of diaspora is where you begin to see that diversification of the network.
Yes.
And you do begin to see, that reaching out. And I think the hidden trick for me, so we've worked, when I say we, as a colleague, Kingsley Aikens, and maybe it's this point that you're speaking to, Professor Dunbar, he ran a very successful Irish diaspora philanthropic organization, and he said part of his mandate in his work was to find DCPs, which stood for Deep Closet Pallies, that weren't necessarily front and center in those communities,
Right.
So I think across time you do begin to see that diversification, and sometimes there's those hallmarks of the society as well that evolve over time, so the role, and speaking to the Irish context, the role of the Catholic Church and maybe the weakening of the church in society. Right. So society is kind of shifting in front of our eyes. And what we're seeing, for example, is a deepening diversification of even the Irish diaspora, across other, not just Celtic nations, but Hispanic nations. So you have that hybridity building, and as people build confidence within that migratory journey, you do begin to see hopefully an articulation of that community confidence as well to bridge out and bring out. But the trick I think we're missing in it, to be frank, is, at a more global looking down level, I think getting diaspora communities working together across diasporas. I think, right. I think there's an important piece of that. And, don't get me wrong, a lot of effort is being put into that and well-meaning, but a lot of it is kind of light touch, project-based funding stuff that, is not really taking grain at a community level to keep it going, so I should predate this by saying you can't do it in universities. It's called plagiarism. But I'm a founding member of a group called CASE, which stands for Copy and Steal Everything. So within diaspora engagement in Ireland, for example, what we began to do historically, we began to look at what other communities were doing, but we leveraged that as a way of building relationships with those communities. So we looked at the time, in the kind of the mid 20th century, what was the Jewish community doing in North America for their community? You look at India at the moment, look what they're doing through diaspora engagement. And I think the more you can get that communication going and that cross community, because what you don't want to do is to create insular communities, yes. Just through diaspora. Yes. And that's the science of it. And I think, it's quite sad to say this on one level, but even when we talk about diasporas, you take the US as an example, you'll have diasporas walking the halls of Congress, but you'll have diasporas in the soup kitchen. It's a big scope of where these people are kind of situated across society. So there's different pressures across that spectrum, I would say. So.
Yeah, thank you so much, both. And by the way, I just wanted to connect the dots, because we're talking more about, cultural diaspora, but nowadays diaspora can be also like a corporate, and or we have MBA alumni that are part of our webinar today as well, and this is also a diaspora. So quite interesting as well. The way we have built Ubiquity is that we created like those different communities that can come from your different circles you had at different moment in your life. And when you actually, as Robin said, when you're new in a place or when you're traveling somewhere, being connected to either, for me, for instance, the Armenian diaspora of people in startups, or alumni of my university, or my ex-colleagues from, my corporate time, and so on. So what about, more like bringing it back to this modern world of corporates and so on? Like, what would you have to say about that?
Well, let me start by just throwing in really something about the way in which friendships are created, and indeed this is also true of family relationships, but there is an incredible, and this bears back on this tendency for all diasporas and migrants to look, look for their own community and reconstitute it in a foreign land. This effect that's known as homophily, our friends and preferred family members are very, very strongly influenced by how much we share in common with them. Now, some of those things are things like personality and so on that you can't do much about, and in that sense aren't very interesting. The interesting ones are the cultural ones, which we took to calling the 7 pillars of friendship, because they're like 7 dimensions, which are things you acquire culturally. So you learn them, and therefore they change through the course of a lifetime to some extent. But they seem to establish the community you grew up in or you became socialized in. They're things like your hobbies and interests, your career trajectory, where you came from, where you grew up, that's to say, although we often short circuit that and refer to where we were born, which isn't always the same thing. Your musical tastes, your sense of humor, your moral and political views, and so on. These 7 dimensions have a very, very powerful effect on our preferred friends and preferred family members. Out of all our extended family, the ones we get on best with are the ones we share most of these 7 dimensions with. So you're in a core of what we call shoulders to cry on friends, which are your kind of support group in times of crisis and emergency that everybody sort of has to some extent. They tend to share 6 or 7 of these dimensions with you. You just have a lot in common with them. And as you go out sort of towards the periphery to the edge of the Dunbar number, it sort of will drift down to 1. Martin and I'm sure, are both aficionados of tiddlywinks. and so we get on famously. Of course, that might not be enough to keep a relationship going for a lifetime, but especially when one of us gets bored with tiddlywinks and finds some other interesting hobby. But it's enough to engage us and if you like, have a conversations, be able to sit down of an evening over a few beers and enjoy each other's company. So those components then become very, very powerful attractants in who you gravitate towards, no matter who they are, whether they're from your community or another community. That if you share things in common, then you're willing to make the effort to go and talk to them. And of course, that's what really creates these very long lasting friendships that survive distance and time. And we're very happy to reconstitute when we get the opportunity, because those tend to be friendships that we have, or relationships that we share a lot of these 7 pillars in common with. But as you mentioned, Lara, a lot of those are things like, where did you go to university or college? Because you spend an awful lot of time, dare I say it, as an undergraduate student, doing all the things that create strong bonds, like a lot of laughing and singing and dancing together, eating and drinking together, and all these kind of things, and telling emotional stories that build these strong relationships that last a long time. But you see it in things like if you look at the friendship circles of doctors, medical doctors, most of their friends are doctors. If you look at the friendship circles of lawyers, most of their friends are lawyers. And of course we used to think this was because nobody would speak to lawyers. But no, the answer is they've got something interesting in common to talk about when they get together. So they naturally gravitate to each other. They've got a shared interest. And, your career trajectory, by the same token, is a shared interest. Oh, yes, we both work for this company, maybe we've worked for the same company in different places. You've got a point of connection. And these points of connection become very, very important in both attracting us, but also in maintaining those relationships. But everything is subject to these decay effects. So if you don't keep reinforcing them, even the fact that you both worked for, some big multinational, eventually is going to fade into, well, that was an interesting bit of my life, but
Yeah. It's funny you say that, Professor Dunbar. To jump in there, I I might be kind of oversimplifying it here, but most people don't put in the hard work to keep those relationships going.
right.
And it is sometimes about in today's world, it might be picking up the phone or using Ubiquity that you folks are developing, in a sense of, very simple things like dropping a note to someone you haven't seen in a while and asking them, how are they? It's very, it's very powerful in today's world. A handwritten note goes a long way
Right.
in today's world. But I think, to bring it back to maybe where Professor Dunbar started at the beginning of the conversation as well, I think it's important that we don't see what we're talking about in the previous session of the webinar as disconnected to what's happening to people that are listening in terms of how they're building their lives and building their career, because the science and the thinking behind this can be applied, while it may be rooted in humanities, social science, the interdisciplinary nature of making yourself prosper in the digital world. You need to be looking in non-traditional ways. I'll give an example. Every summer, I set myself a challenge to read books that don't have anything to do with diaspora. and I'm trying to figure out, is there diaspora components to what they're talking about? So one of the books I read this year was Vivek Murthy's book on loneliness. And you can see diaspora running through those pages. The word isn't in it, but you can see it running through the pages. So
because he's a double diaspora.
Yeah, exactly.
First of all, from India to Britain, which is where he grew up. I think he was born, grew up, and then he migrated to America and became, part of the governmental establishment. Very successful.
And genuinely, so another line that stuck with me over the years, and particularly from kind of international relations, was from a Professor Anne-Marie Slaughter. She was at Princeton, but she runs a New America think tank now, and she was writing about power in the networked age. And she said the measure of your power is your connectedness. Now she was talking about nation states there, but when I was reading that applies to an individual to me as much as it does to a nation state. And I think, coming back, Lara, to your question about, I think we're living through an age where people are attaching belonging to different institutions or processes that maybe we have done, but the concepts are there and they're just evolving. So this is anecdotal without to do the scientific evidence, so I don't want to oversimplify it. But whenever I have a conversation with somebody and I say, tell me more about you, the first thing they tell me is what they do. They don't necessarily tell me about them or who they are. They tell you what they do. So that tells you that their career is deeply rooted to their identity in that sense. But I think, the lens for this with the corporate diaspora piece, and this is where I get in trouble with the diaspora purists, because look, I like to take the ideas and kind of push them as a concept and say, well, that can apply here or it can apply there. So alumni and diaspora are quite similar to me. But, one of my favorite lines was from, I think it was the US chairman of PwC about 2 or 3 years ago. And he said, my HR people keep coming into me and saying, we're in the global war for talent. And he said, I had to tell them the bad news. And I think, Professor Dunbar, you used this phrase earlier about something else, the information age. The war is over. Talent has won. So companies, we hear this again and again, from all the tech leaders in Ireland, that we deal with this lens. They say to us, the biggest challenge we have is not necessarily the attraction of talent, it's the retention of talent, and when you think about concepts of belonging and the lens of corporate diaspora, in the sense of making sure people that you're bringing in from outside, whether that's geographically outside or just outside your organization, how do you make sure they build that sense of belonging to the organization? And Professor Dunbar mentioned it earlier in terms of mobility. If you look at the job flow and the career trajectory of people nowadays, the old days of going into a company and working 40, 50 years and getting the watch and the pat the back at the end of it are kind of done and dusted, So I think companies are realizing that their talent is also incredibly mobile. And a company that clicked this, I think, and they did a really good job, and it was McKinsey. So McKinsey realized there's a hell of a lot of people not going to end up staying with us. And for different reasons, they might think they're not good enough, they might miss talent, or that kind of stuff. But what they've done is create an alumni piece to actually engage with these people when they left. And guess what they're doing? They're referring business back to McKinsey.
Right.
And they're doing business. So for me, the corporate diaspora stuff kind of bridges that world of corporate alumni, but also looking internally as an organization, because as Professor Dunbar said with his number, it applies to business, it applies to military. There's applications of this science and this thinking we don't want to limit ourselves to our disciplinary applications. You know, when I wanted to understand diaspora engagement in terms of diaspora philanthropy, I talked to the people running alumni stuff at the US Ivy League schools, because that's what they do.
Yeah.
In a sense
Yeah.
of building it. So I'll pause there, but I just wanted to connect those dots in a sense of, you know, so that people are listening. You're living through this in a sense where you're going.
And that's a very important point, actually, I think, that you raised, that in fact, you know, your past contacts, let's say, just thinking about
Yeah.
the business world now, your past contacts may actually be your gateway to future opportunities. And if you've
Exactly.
lost them,
Yeah, yeah.
those doors have closed, you know. So there's very good reason for trying to maintain, unless of course they were horrible people and you didn't like them,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
you know, there are very good reasons to try and maintain these kind of dispersed old friendships and relationships, because actually, you know, setting aside all the psychological and physical health benefits, just in a sort of commercial sense,
it's,
you never
it,
know when those relationships are going to turn up trumps and open a door to, you know, fame and fortune.
look, it's I don't, just to jump in on that, Lara, because I'm conscious of for Q&A as well. You know, there was incredibly powerful talk by a lady called Carla Harris. She's a Wall Street banker, and she said to get ahead in your career, you need two types of currency. You need performance currency, but she said the bad news is that our parents have kind of lied to us, in the sense that if you go in and keep your head down and do a good job, you'll get ahead. She said doing a good job is the bare minimum, but she said the real game changer in your career is relationship currency. And she said, what that comes down to is essentially, because think about it, when I was a young academic, or when I was trying to build my business, people were making decisions about me and I wasn't in that room. That's the nature of the world. You know, whether you're getting promoted or you're going for the job, you know. So her line that was very powerful as a visual, she said, who's carrying your papers into those rooms? You know, and I think that's what Professor Dunbar is angling towards as well. And that's in your network, that's in your friendships. That's the reality.
Exactly.
So if we had Robin to go now talking about the digital age and being human in a digital world, what would you say then happens to that number, and how can we, you know, thrive in that digital world? And also let's also put together as well, what is the difference between meeting people in person and what makes.
Okay, so everything we've done tells us that the digital world, social world, is virtually the same as the face-to-face social world. There are circles of friendship and so on, even the frequencies with which we contact people don't actually get changed at all by different kinds of social media. From the telephone to Twitter, you see exactly the same patterns. But there's an illusion that actually the social media open up new opportunities for you and allow you to have more friends. But actually all we're doing is including people outside our normal social circle of 150. So the Dunbar number actually extends beyond the 150 for several more layers of, you know, but of increasingly poor quality. It's not quite the right word, but less close friendship. So the next layer out beyond the Dunbar number goes out to about 500, and that's the layer of acquaintances. So, you know, these are people you have a kind of, you know, a lot of them you work with, but you would never invite them home. You go and have a beer with them, but you'd never invite them home. That's the big test case there. So that really doesn't seem to have changed. So we just, you know, we do online on our Facebook page exactly what we do in the real world. We attach acquaintances and people beyond that, voyeurs onto our private lives, as I always describe them. But you know, the pattern is still there. The meaningfulness of relationships hasn't changed at all. I think what the digital social media do very well, which is why they were so successful in the first place, is they allow us to keep contact with friends who, because they've dispersed over very big geographical distances, we would very quickly lose contact with. So if you think about historical migrations, you know, the first generation to go would be writing letters to and from home and saying, why don't you come? It's wonderful. Or the snow is terrible here. Stay where you are. As the case may be. But the second generation kind of go, well, who are these people? We've heard these names, but we know nothing about them. We've never met them. They mean nothing to us. Well, I think now, digital media just offers you a better opportunity to keep those kind of deeper relationships going and ticking over, if you like, because again, you never know when you're going to turn up in that person's country, and they're a good way in, if you like, to the local community. So I think from that point of view, social media do exactly what Mark Zuckerberg promised when he first set it up, which is keep friends in touch. But by and large, you don't meet friends that way. You really need to, in the end, meet them face to face to have a really meaningful, deep relationship with them.
The thing, I guess, is that those social media have also, like, social media has in general very much changed. And so your 150 gets completely diluted in a lot of noise. So for instance,
Yes.
Robin, how many connections do you have on LinkedIn, for instance?
Oh,
and where do you find your friends into it?
yes.
That's also, I guess, I would say Mark started something like that has been groundbreaking and changed our lives. I was, on Facebook when it first started, and it changed completely my life. I then moved to Hong Kong and then moved around and stay connect back to my classmates from the French school in Algeria, that at that time when we left Algeria, we didn't have even,
Yes.
hardly have the email of each other.
Right, exactly.
It was not even it was starting. And so it allows you to reconnect with all those people. But I guess what happened now is that the past, let's say 10 and even more 5 years, is that those social media have changed so much that the first purpose they were built in has kind of changed as well in their business model.
Yes.
This is what I guess makes it a bit challenging in a digital world when you want to be human to stay connected with the people, I guess, right? What do you think about?
Yeah, no, I think, I mean, in some sense, that's been the downside of the Facebook model, and I suppose this is true of LinkedIn and other social media too, where they're pushing people for you to connect to. And they aren't necessarily people you want to connect to. It's just that they are friends of friends of friends in some vague connection. And for some purposes, you can, I think that's the merit of, from a potential merit from something like LinkedIn's point of view, because it's designed to create networks of people of common business interests. They might have future contacts that are useful, but I'm not sure that that's terribly relevant to friendship circles, because you just end up with what I call voyeurs onto your breakfast photographs. And why are they interested in what you had for breakfast?
And so what about the in-person then, if you had to say a few words about the in-person? And by the way, everyone is allowed
I think the big issue with in-person is it doesn't come any better. Certainly all our evidence for that on the studies we've done, other people's as well, show the same effect, that people just prefer in-person interactions over, I always describe social media and even the telephone basically as a sticking plaster. It papers over the cracks that are opening up between two friends. Keeps them in contact, but sooner or later, if you don't meet up in person, there's nothing on earth is going to stop that friendship decaying eventually into an acquaintanceship, and then, well, somebody I once knew when I was very young and I can't remember much about, and probably we don't have much in common now because you've not grown together. I mean, part of that issue of retaining friendships is you grow together. You kind of exchange cultural tips, as it were, about new comedians or new films or new music or something like that, which keeps that common interest burning and keeps the relationship alive. Whereas if you drift too much apart, then you end up in different places and you no longer have the same kind of interest in conversationally, the style of jokes you like now has changed so much. You have to explain the joke to the other person. That just destroys everything.
And Robin, then also for, because after COVID, the world has changed as well a lot in terms of remote working. And it's true that, people got used to it. And there is like this dilemma about, is it important to go back to work, or can we just stay behind our computers and continue work? And can we make new sales with being behind our screens, and so on and so on? So what would you say if you had to consider more like the professional side of being offline or online and in person, and what does it really change?
There are certain kinds of jobs that can be done remotely, but they tend to be more in a subcontracting way. You want somebody to, put together 20 lines of computer code for you to run something, and they don't have to be there. They just need to produce the product, as it were. But I think in any creative industry, whether that's a government department trying to run some semblance of civilized society, or it's a company making something, or producing some kind of product that people might want to use, like Ubiquity, of course, then it really, there is no substitute for being in the same room together. It makes a massive difference. And I think the other thing you have to remember about home working, hybrid working in this sense, is only half the population can do it in a company. There are some poor folk whose jobs cannot be done remotely. The guy on the reception desk, telephone. Well, I suppose telephone can be done at home, but the people who make the sandwiches in the cafeteria and serve you, or clean the offices, nurses, doctors, teachers. None of these people can do their jobs remotely. They are face-to-face kinds of jobs. And there's a tendency for, in most big multinational companies, for the people that do those kind of necessary face-to-face jobs to be poorly paid. So my worry is that, those who can work at home tend to be up the management hierarchy, as it were, and they tend to get paid more. And so you very quickly run the risk of having a two-tier society, those who can work at home and those who can't. And that's going to lead to a lot of friction and dissatisfaction within companies.
I think just to jump in there, if it's helpful, I have the pleasure of working with the Institute for Integrated Transitions, and there's a colleague there, Dr. Seth Kaplan. He's working through a concept at the moment of fragile neighborhoods. And I think you do get a lot of the interconnectivity, even with remote working. You go around, it's not just cities, rural places you go around, people are not out and about anymore. And for me, I genuinely, I might be oversimplifying it again, but for me, I think deep, meaningful happiness is a people business.
Yeah.
You need to be out and in contact, and that might be me popping into the local grocer every week and having a chat for 10 minutes, but there's something being done there for you as a human being. And I think, I hinted at it earlier, that balance between high tech and high touch. I think if we keep going too far to the high tech, it's a murky road. It's a slippery slope. So I've often seen technology as a tool to help me, nurture and manage my network and keep an eye on how do we actually keep on top of making those connections, and not just a phone call, but going for the, we have a line, a hot coffee beats a phone call every day of the week. So getting out and sitting down with people, I think that's the piece that, and I think people can get comfortable with, thinking this is the same as the three of us sitting down in a room having a chat. It's not. But hopefully we're getting something out of it in terms of ideas and stuff. But can you imagine the other stories we'll pick up, or who you should really talk to is this person or that person, and all that kind of stuff. So my advice would be, think of technology as a tool, to help you. But if you're looking for happiness, it's not likes on the post. It's not how many people looked at it. Happiness comes from sitting down and having a bit of a laugh with people.
Absolutely.
And by the way,
in the Irish terminology, it's the quality of the crack.
Yeah, that's it. That's it.
Which for the rest of you means the conversation.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I should have put in that caveat. There's
And I actually love it because, again, in my new Bible, we talk about all this, like keeping your friends in mind, and everything, every single friendships in newly forming communities, making friends with strangers, signals of belonging. All those areas are so interesting, and we're trying really to put basically, Robin, this into an app.
Oh my goodness.
And it's like a great inspiration. And also what I love about it is because we had the opportunity to chat enough together. So when I read it, I have the feeling you're reading it for me. Like I hear your voice and your tone of voice when I'm like actually reading it. And I hope people from this webinar will have the same, effect when they're going to read one of your books, is like thinking of you reading it when they're having this pleasant moment of getting some very interesting knowledge on relationships, human relationships. Shall we ask for people if they have any questions? And if anyone wants to ask any questions, everybody has been very shy. I said in the very beginning, to ask questions.
While you're looking at that as well, Lara, because I'm conscious of people dialing in as well, I'll share a personal story that might be able to help as well in this. Sometimes that can feel quite daunting for people, in terms of, the heavy workload of maintaining those relationships, building the friendships. Look, I'm a bit of a reluctant academic at heart. I know I'll end up in university, but I'm fighting it for the next 10 years of my career. But genuinely, I consider myself deeply introverted, and I'm as happy as Larry in a library or an archive. You could put me in there for a year and just open the window twice a year to let some light in.
Pass the sandwich through.
Yeah. But genuinely, because I do think, sometimes people, and what we found in the networking work that we do is that quite often introverts are actually the most effective network and relationship builders, because they do it with authenticity and meaning, and they're very careful about how they go about it. So I'm sure you might have people listening saying, I really want to get involved in trying to do that. Trust me, I had to push myself to do it, and get out there, but it becomes habit eventually, in the sense of doing it. But so if anybody's kind of nervous about doing it, I say, look, believe in this. Trust me, my career is proof that it works. There's people listening in today that have helped me, that are friends now from childhood to recent. It works. Let me just say that.
Yes, no, I agree 100%.
So we had a comment from someone saying that belong is not byproduct of success, it's condition of success.
Yes.
The chat box is disabled, so can chat, could you please turn on? It's actually, I disabled it for everyone, so everyone can, I turned it on like some time ago. So we have, so what are the 3 specific things we can do to be fully connected through online channels, but at the same time foster face-to-face interactions in such a fast-paced society without feeling burnout? And this is from Shannon Somaza. Do you want me to read it again, or you got it?
I'm going to let Martin take the lead on this one.
That's what you say in Ireland, passing the hot potato. No, look, I think it is about, and look, we have to be cognizant of as well, given the geographical spread, when we talk about maintaining relationships, there's cost involved in that, in terms of, not just energy and mental cost, but financial cost, in terms of getting this going. So I think it is about setting mini targets for yourself in terms of, when you look at your friendships, which ones have gone, maybe are on the cusp of, as Professor Dunbar said, of falling off that cliff, maybe from, going to where you're going and being strategic about how you push it forward. And I think that's where Ubiquity, the reason why I got so excited about what you're trying to build, Lara, is that it gives you that opportunity. And, don't quote me on this. I know it's being recorded, so I'll probably get in trouble. But if you're in a position where your company is bringing you to conferences or gatherings, use the side time of those commitments to really kind of nourish your network, and that will bring benefit to the company. So what I would say is set yourself mini goals and mini targets of, very simple things like, if it is even a band-aid to an in-person connection, but I am going to pick up the phone to 3 people I didn't speak to for the last 3 or 4 months this week. I am going to send them a handwritten note. Very simple things like that, that don't take a huge amount of time, but at least it signals to the other person, I'm not forgetting you. We mightn't be in the same geographical space, but you're part of my friendship circle. And trust me, I promise you, not many other people are doing that. I've seen this week when we train a lot of people in the private sector world, and they think, I want to be honest, a lot of them think this is kind of soft and fuzzy at times, but I know deep down that, the people that will do this will get ahead. So hopefully that answers the question a bit in the sense of finding that balance, but set yourself just mini goals. You don't want to boil the ocean in one go. Set yourself mini goals about where you're going, and eventually becomes habit. One thing that a mentor said to me that I think is very important, he said, at a minimum, Martin, you have 3 opportunities for coffee meetings every day with people: breakfast, lunch, and after you leave the office. Right? So think about that. You don't have to do it every day, but do that 3 days a week. That's 10 conversations you're going to have with people over the course of a week that you weren't going to have if you didn't do it. And it might sound very simple, but add that up over a year. And all of a sudden, you're regenerating your relationship. So that hopefully there are a couple of tips that can help people as they move forward.
100%. And just to say as well, Shannon and I, we actually had our first interaction last year online, and then it kind of faded because I was so busy doing so many things. And then suddenly I realized, oh my God, I have to meet her. So we met face to face. And since then, we really built memories. And it really came that we created an amazing relationship and partnership with Radisson, thanks to actually our face-to-face relationship. I don't think this would have happened if we didn't have the chance to spend time together, get to know each other. And I have to say that has been really super important. There is also, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and I'll close out on the question on this. We've learned from our work with diaspora communities, whether it's for fundraising, whether it's for supporting different entities. It sounds so simple, but it's true. People give to people. So, and the number one reason why people have given through diasporas is belief in the mission. But the number 2 reason is because of who asked them. Mm-hmm. And that is very powerful. Yeah. So I know it's easy to lie in bed. It's easy to watch Netflix at night. It's easy to, go onto LinkedIn, but LinkedIn, well, maybe in time with AI, it'll talk back to you. But, I think that personal piece, that people make decisions, not computers, not machines, people do.
Yeah.
Yes. So
I agree. It's in many ways, it's very important to make the effort to make the contact, because even if it's just a very fleeting contact, the one thing it's saying is that person thinks I'm important enough to them, not important in an important sense, but I'm important enough to them for them to reach out and make contact. But by extension, of course, you have to be willing to make the effort to respond and engage. Otherwise, nothing will happen. So I always describe this as rather like how we make romantic relationships, which are just a very specific case of this general friendship phenomenon. But if somebody doesn't get off the fence and and say hello, I'm here, then no romantic relationship is going to happen. You're going to drift past each other in the night like 2 lonely ships. So it is important to do that, but it does depend on reciprocation. But I think you're right that ultimately, whenever possible, you have to meet up, and there is a big gender difference here. The girls are much better at doing this than the boys are, I'm afraid.
Interesting.
The boys, and the impression we have very much from our research, and other people have the same observations, is that boys' friendships tend to be much more casual. So if it's out of sight, out of mind, it doesn't mean to say it wasn't a great friendship, and it doesn't mean to say it can't be picked up again. Years later by casual contact. But the boys tend to be very bad at if you're in the same city, why not meet up for a coffee? But
exactly. So actually, we have suddenly a lot of questions. So I'm going to go through them. First one is a comment from Alan DC, who said that comment rather than question. Fascinating discussion with some really valuable insights, especially in relation to the corporate alumni and diaspora. Thank you. And thank you, Alan. Patrick McDermott said, for friends and family that we can only see face-to-face infrequently because of distance, Are there any tips or hacks to maximize the bonding relationship building from the time that we do get to spend together? That's we have many more now coming up, so
yeah, I think the short answer to family relationships, though, is they are much more robust than friendships. And this is partly because they're kept in place by a spider's web of interrelationships between an extended family that keeps everybody locked in and kind of up to date. Some, you're kind of hearing about who's doing what in the family in a way which you don't so much with friendships, because friendship networks tend to be much more fragmented. So family are, at the end of the day, family are important. They really, they're the cavalry. When everybody else has abandoned you, the only people who are going to come to your rescue when you've completely disgraced yourself is family. So it is important to keep those relationships going, even so. But again, it's the same principle. You've got to make the effort.
I was going to say, Professor Bert, you sound like you're talking like about Irish families there.
Well, paradoxically, families are much easier to break contact with catastrophically. Right?
Interesting.
So when family relationships, particularly close family relationships, break down, they're much more like divorces. Whereas when friendships break down, unless they're very close friendships, what you might think of as platonic friendships or best friends forever type friendships. But the sort of more casual friendships, you go out with, every Friday night to have a beer with the guys or something. When those friendships break down, they tend to break down softly because people just stop seeing each other. And so they're much easier to reconcile. And you have this paradox where family relationships are very important, but they are more intense. And so they are at a level more fragile. They're very forgiving, but once you've got one too many straws on the camel's back,
right,
then it's terminal, and it's you're into deathbed reconciliations only at that point. So don't go that far. Don't let it go that far.
Yeah.
So we have another question from someone that is saying how to instill family traditions into diaspora who are very much living away from their families and who have children who receive limited exposure to the execution of their traditions. And he says that the context, or she says, by the way, that the context is born in Europe, live in Middle East for more than a decade, observing second generation diaspora expatriate community, has granted insight into the cognitive efforts to forge traditions into the next generation, which is a challenge when schools seek to uphold religious traditional events, but not always achieving true integrity to their show events. This is challenging to achieve with integrity.
Yeah, look, sorry.
No, I was only going to say very briefly before, because this is your question, really. One thing that does strike me as very important in this context, of course, I probably all diaspora communities complain about this. The children just lose track of their, sort of cultural heritage, as it were, which is a great shame that happens. But there's a very good reason why that happens, in the sense that if you're a kid, you want to play with the kids. And if that means, being immersed in their culture, that's what you do. I mean, that's what kids do. They're very good at doing that. And they do it, if you like, for precisely that reason. It's to be part of the community. So this kind of does speed up that process. And then, of course, kids just complain about their parents having these old-fashioned ideas, and they don't want to be part of that. And that happens all over the world. So it's part of a tension, because actually, yes, of course you'd like to. And of course, when they get to about 45 or 50, they all go, oh, I wish my father had taught me how to speak, whatever, or taught me more about the culture. I know so little about it. So they always regret it in the long run, but it's a kind of just part and parcel of that natural process of kids building friendships. It's they don't care about cultures, they don't care about ethnicities, they don't care about anything like that. They just care, do you kick a football like I do? If they're boys.
No, look, you took the words out of my mouth. First of all, the colleague who asked the question, the good news is you're not alone in that endeavor, in the sense of with diasporas around the world. And, there's a bit of an underpinning that I think we need to be conscious of as well within diaspora engagement. So, look, I have a bit of a subtle distinction between the state and the nation and how I conceptualize this, in the sense the state are the lines on the map, but the nation is a global notion of what it means to be from somewhere.
Yes.
So you hear this again, Irishness, Scottishness, and the reality is, even Professor Dunbar mentioned it, across the life cycles, that can get reawakened at different milestones of people's lives. So for example, what we see quite a bit is when the second generation have children, there's a bit of a reawakening of that sense. They want to make sure that the children, and particularly the parents of the second generation, are worried about the grandchildren not having that connection to place.
Yeah.
But I think what you have to try and do along the way is to try to make it a little bit fun as well. If you're dealing with kind of the younger generation. In Ireland, for example, we do quite a lot around genealogy. And so I sit on the board of a charity in Ireland called Ireland Reaching Out, which is a free reverse genealogy offering to the Irish diaspora, to essentially explore their story and learn about it, but essentially to come back and visit. So they have fun when they come back, and they build that connection. And what we've seen when we track the data of that has led to important engagements in terms of kids coming to Ireland to go to school or college or education. And kind of the way you push that out. So what I would say is that, I wouldn't take that as an insult, because what I hear from diasporas around the world, particularly from the second generation, is that, well, my parents' Ireland is not my Ireland, and things like that. So that's what I mean about the lines on the map and the notion. And I think, particularly when you have diasporas that are deepening across generations, you have to get comfortable with the fact that no one person's sense of Irishness should be more important than somebody else's. It's just that they have a different connection to it. And you see that play out quite often in like the arts and the theatre. One of my favourite stories of the Irish diaspora, because diasporas like to fight, they like to fight amongst them, because they have different views. But I remember sitting down with some recent Irish immigrants in Canada a couple of years ago, and they put on a play in the local arts theatre about Ireland and contemporary Ireland. And they had emigrated at a time when Ireland had voted for the same-sex marriage, and Ireland was changing. Ireland was a different place. But you had people that had emigrated to Canada in the 50s and the 60s, and when they saw this play, there was community uproar. In a sense of, that's not my Ireland, but the young people were saying, well, it is our Ireland, we just left it. So you have all these tensions that play out, but that's the beauty of it. You're talking about communities there. There's going to have all those little tensions, and so I would say, don't keep yourself awake at night worrying about it. Provide the pathways where if they can engage, and I think this is where technology can be a tool, maybe to give an example of how people go about maybe addressing that issue. So, for example, in Greece, there was a big nervousness about the weakening of Greek culture and language and mythology in the children of the diaspora, the second generation. So the Ministry of Foreign Affairs actually did a partnership with the Nearchos Foundation to create an app called Stalianenka. And it produces cartoons, but it tells the story of Greek mythology and Greek language, and there's tools out there now that can help, because if you're talking to kids nowadays and wanting to get them engaged, we're going to have to get them engaged at some level on screen. As I say, high tech, but high touch eventually. Get them on the screen, to get to. So hopefully that gives a little bit of an answer to what's going on around the world.
So we have 3 more questions to go. If you want, if you're good for continuing this, Robin and Martin, is that okay to answer?
Yep. Let's deal with these 3 questions.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just the answers are no comment.
Yes.
Yes. So from Alexis Zira, it's what impact do you think the rapid advancement of AI in our lives will have on how we form and maintain our relationship and networks? Which is quite an interesting one.
But I really don't know, and I think none of us know is the answer. We're going to have to wait and see. It could be a disaster. The only comment I'd make, I think, is that what worries me about it is that it really looks suspiciously like the risk of romantic scams on the internet. So the reason we fall prey to romantic scams on the internet is we never get to meet the person. because the scammer is very careful to avoid that. Very careful. They don't even send you a real picture of themselves. They cobble a picture out of some, models agency. So, they look these beautiful people. And we build these avatars in our heads, and we do it with friendships. We build this avatar in our head. We do it with romantic relationships. This person can do no wrong. And gradually, face-to-face contact allows us to rub the edges of that rosy sunglasses picture. And the risk, I think, with something like AI is that you can just get deceived very easily, unless and until you can meet the person in the flesh, as it were.
So yeah, and Robin, just very quickly, again about keeping your friends in mind and so on. So to answer also to Alex's questions, like what we're doing at Ubiquity is that we're using AI for good as well as we use tech for good, and so the whole thing about the Dunbar's number, which is your cognitive limit of maintaining stable relationships. What we're trying to do with Ubiquity Magic is to bring some magic to the Dunbar's number and help that number in the sense that it can also remind you, especially in a world where we're like super mobile, keep on meeting people, going to many conferences and so on, to kind of remind you who to catch up with because you haven't catch up for a while.
Yes.
And this is it's called smart catch-ups, like smart recommendations for catch-ups. So, and it's part of Ubiquity Magic, and we're launching it actually very soon, which we hope is at least an answer to using AI for good in order to help maintain a relationship with people. So Abir Hilwenji is saying the chat box is disabled for me too. Sorry about that. I just disabled the chat box for everyone to everyone. So I'm very sorry. I didn't realize that when I was too passionate about listening to Professor Robin and Martin. So the question is, however, I would like to add that although it is important to maintain human values and connections in such increasingly digital environment, for me, this should not be applied to work. Working wirelessly has very good values in terms of cost saving, increased productivity, and enhanced work-life balance. I guess this was more a comment. And then I would ask the question of Manel Reyes, who's saying, have you found a distinction of any sort in your research of how friendships via workplace and friendships via social life slash networking differ?
I haven't, is the answer. They all seem to be in the end the same. The place of work is a place of opportunity to meet people, just the same as belonging to some club or association provides you with an opportunity to meet people. So in that sense, you should treat your place of work as a social village. And I think that's the bottom line. I don't know, Martin would have to suggest different.
No, I'd echo that because, I think it's more about the science of friendships and building that out and the different arenas in which you find yourself navigating that, they become the vehicles of that. And they evolve over career and life, as you get older, schools, universities, So look, I would agree with that, and just on the AI stuff, I think we're at the foothills of that. So it's very difficult to kind of project out where we're going. But look, I always just look at the words, I think words, sometimes we forget to stop and look at words and the word artificial, to me doesn't fill me with hope, that's where we're going.
Yeah.
And I think, genuinely in terms of the work and the social relationship moving forward, I think if you do this work, it gives you it gives you authenticity, and I think authenticity will be in very short supply in the world. I think as we look into moving forward as an individual, as organizations, and I think getting on top of that, we just have to look at the news of the last couple of days to figure out that it's in short supply already. So I think we can push that.
And I think just to sum that up, really, just it occurs to me as you're saying that, the real issue is relationships, friendships require work.
Yeah.
There's no shortcut to it called AI.
Yeah.
Look, I would like to thank you both very much. It was such a good fun. I really enjoyed very much. I hope you did enjoy too.
Yeah,
I
It's great.
it was great. Thank you
Yeah.
for putting it on.
Yes,
Yeah.
I see people in the chat thanking us, and unfortunately, I'm sure that they would have reacted more if I knew I knew that I had to disable in two ways that chat. But anyway, I'm very, very happy we've been here together, and I really appreciate your time. I would like just to maybe, for the ones that have been staying for so long, just pull this off, and I don't know if you can see it.
Yeah.
At all. Yeah. So for whoever that wants to, so just a moment, I can't see you anymore. Can you see?
We can see you.
Yeah.
You can see me, but you cannot see what I'm
Yes,
previewing.
yes. We can see
Okay,
your
perfect.
shared
So
screen.
whoever wants to basically get Ubiquity, please use this QR code. And we're going to have Ubiquity Magic coming soon. We have revamped our app, our branding, and we're trying to do, really, we work very, very hard to basically bring everything that Robin and Martin were saying into an app, which is not easy. And it is, I see you're laughing, but it's true. It is really not easy. And but yeah, we're hoping that we'll bring something different to the world, something that is needed, and that allow us to, you know, have building like the opportunity to build great memories offline, stay connected, belong everywhere, never feel lonely, stay connected to any type of circle of friends, classmates, ex-colleagues you may have, etc., etc. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you so much again, and really appreciate.
Thank you very much.
For your
Thank you.
time.
Really appreciate it.
And yes, in case the session has been recorded, so we will definitely share it. And I think everybody's sending you messages. Very interesting topic. I have learned a lot listening to this. Thank you so much, Emma. Yeah, everybody's sending you thanks. So I really just extend it to.
This is all Martin's fan club.
No. Trust me, I think I learned the most.